We begin the current Daf, Mesechta Sotah Daf. We begin 11 lines down at the top of the Amud, where we continue with Halacha, the next Mishnah, continuing on this theme regarding the title of the parak, Hayinaitel, with they're doing the procedure of the drinking of the Mei Sotah. And what happens, our Mishnah describes, if she doesn't want to go ahead with it, it will depend on what stage it is regarding what the halacha is going to be. Asher's corresponds to Bakazich and Nechezkel, turn to Daf Chaim, Pishna we're joining with today's Daf. Some of the discussed in today's Daf are, if the scroll was not erased yet, and then at that point she says, I don't want to drink, even she doesn't just say why, she just I don't want to drink, that then she'd be able to back out. What happens if Nimchaka Megillah, the Megillah was erased? So then it depends. If she says that, okay, I'm tummy, so then there's no point in drinking, we know that she's tummy. But Nimchaka Megillah, if it's erased and she says, I don't want to drink, then we actually force her because we're like, okay, it'll be erased it already, and maybe she's only saying it because she's afraid. So then we go ahead and we have her forced to drink that. Then we describe later on in that if a woman would have a merit, and then even though generally right away she would start falling apart, but that would suspend the punishment, and we'll see what type of schusim and how long that will suspend it for. And we have machlekes regarding Rabbi Yaakov regarding limchak laminatayra, the parsha of the Sotah. We went through all the psukim in the previous dafim, what is written inside the Megillah machlekes exactly, but it's parshas in the Torah. So the machlekes the Gemara brings is regarding, could you actually take the words, the psukim from the Sefer Torah, and erase that parsha to use for the Megillah Sotah? And the machlekes Tanakama Rabbi Ishi regarding Megillasik Sheir Lahashkes Basotah Acheres. Can you take some previous Megillah that was written for one woman, which wasn't ultimately used, and then could you go ahead and use it to erase for another one? And is that related to the machlekes of Rabbi Yaakov regarding erasing it from a Sefer Torah itself? The Gemara makes a distinction between get and Megillah Sotah regarding Ksiva Lishma. Both of them say law, which Lishma, but the Gemara is going to ask why there's a different halacha between get and Megillah Sotah. And finally, that what comes up in today's daf is that a need is prohibited to enter Machna Leviyah, but a Tamei Meis, and actually even the mess itself, is permitted to remain in Machna Leviyah. So begin the current Daf Chav, 11 lines down, we'll begin the halacha, the next Mishnah. It says the Mishnah like this, Actually, Nimchak HaMegillah. So we know, like we said, there's a scroll that's written with the different psukim of the parsha of Sotah in the Torah. So if it wasn't erased yet, and Amra, she says, Eini Shaisa, she says, I don't want to drink. So Megillah Nignezes. So her scroll is concealed, it's hidden away in the sides of the Heichel, because all Kisvei HaKodesh, which are not fit to be read from, are Nignaz, they're put away so that they shouldn't be disgraced. And there's no utility for it anymore because she's not drinking, so we're not going to erase it. A woman chassa, what do you do with her flower offering? You're not going to bring it anymore because the whole point is when you're going through this whole procedure, so it gets scattered on the place of where the ashes are, which is in the Azara, which is where they burn over there the invalid kachim, the invalid emurim, which the mechitzas are from these karbanas have to be within the kloim, within the curtains, as the Gemara says in the Zevachim Daf Kavdal Beis, that there were 3 areas of ashes, and this was one of them. This was where the mincha would be scattered. Now the reason why is because since this mincha was already sanctified in the vessel, so it has kedusha, so therefore it has to be burnt in the azara. Rashi just translate that the word maspezeres doesn't really mean scattered, it really means burnt. As the Gemara says later on, Daf Chav Gimel, ve'elu shemachasem nisrafais, and it mentions this case of the woman who says, I don't want to drink. So obviously it's not just scattered on the place the ashes, it's actually burnt on the place where the ashes are. Then the Mishnah continues and says, moreover, now this scroll that was not being used anymore because it's not going to be erased, shad, you have a Megillah Sotah. No, it's not kashal lahashkes basotah acheres to use, to give to drink to another suspected adulterous woman. The reason for that is because it says, v'asa la hakayin. La means for her, meaning lishma, for her sake, that you need to have kesiva, lishma has to be written for this one, and you can't go ahead and use it for another one. That was case number 1 of our Mishnah. Then continues the Mishnah, case number 2. What happens if Nimcha Kamagillah? The scroll was already erased. And then, Ba'amra Tameani, she says, I'm not going to drink these waters. I'm tamei, I did it. So then, Hamayim Nishbachim, so the water gets spilled out. Why? Since she says, I'm a tamei, so she is already inspected. The whole point of the bitter waters was only to verify the doubt, was she mezan or not. She's admitting her guilt. So there's no point in drinking, so the water spilled out. Again, we're not going through the procedure of the suffix saita with this minchas kenais, so the mincha gets burnt on the Beis Hadeshin. Case number 3. Nimcha ka Megillah. What happens if the Megillah is already erased, meaning you already dissolved it in the water, and there's the water ready for her to drink and do the test? She says, I'm not drinking. Doesn't say like in the previous case, I am tamei. She says, I'm not drinking. Now, before the Megillah was erased, no problem, don't drink. Leave it out of ksupa. We're not going to do anything because it wasn't erased yet. But now it was erased, and she said, I don't want to drink. So ma'ara noisa, we force her or mashka noisa balkarcha, and we give her to drink against her will. Why? So Rashi explains, because really, maybe she's tahira. And it's because she's afraid that she's saying, oh, no, I don't want to drink, because she knows what can happen. And she's like, maybe it's second guessing, who knows. If she says that she's tamei, so she's admitting, so there's no point. Here, there's a point to have her to drink, because maybe she's really tahira. So we actually, once the Megillah was already erased, so then we force her to drink. So the Mishnah tells us what actually happens is, so she doesn't get a chance in drinking, meaning she just started drinking, her face turns yellow, her eyes start bulging out, and she fills up with veins, meaning the veins in her jaw start bloating. She looks like she's full of veins, and her flesh becomes like lines of bloating. As you learn in the Sifri, that is like these different rods that are sticking out by her. The Heim Oimrim, and they say, get her out of here, that she should not contaminate the Azara. What does that mean? That means where she was standing, as we described in the previous daf, in the Shar Nikanor, which is the gateway that opens up into the Ezras Yisrael, or in the Ezras Nashim, which is where they leave from, which the Gemara is going to ask later on, what do you mean? But in general, we say that Shar Nikanor, and that's actually why we put the site over there, is not Niskadish, does not have the Kedusha of the Azara, and for sure the Ezras Nashim, and even a dead person is allowed to go into the Machan Leviyah. So what is it that they're screaming, get her out of here, that she should not be B'tamid Azara, because she's going to die when she's going to bloat and bust from the drinking the Mesaita. But the Mishnah continues and says, Im yesh lo schos, if she has merit, it would suspend her punishment. Now, yesh schos toila shalachas, you could have a merit that could be suspending your punishment for 1 year. Yesh schos toila beishan, there could be a merit that could suspend for 2 years. And yesh schos toila gimoshan, you could have a certain merit that's suspended for 3 years. Says the Mishnah, Mekanom ben Azai, from here ben Azai says, Chayiv odem l'lamed es bita teira. A person has to teach his daughter Torah. Why? Where does it come in over here? She'im tishta, because that if she drinks, listen to what type of daughter, you have to teach her Torah, because if she's going to drink, teida shaschus Torah, she should know that it's the merit that's suspending her punishment. Meaning she should know and she should learn the parsha of Sotah, that is a halacha of schus Torah, which we learn out from Beniksa v'nizra zera, that, as we'll see later on, the Gemara, V'niksa, she's clean through her schuyas, the amount of zriya zera, which is 9 months of how long it takes to carry a baby, and some say even more. So then she'll know, don't think that the reason why is because the Torah is not correct, whatever. No, she'll know, she learned Torah, she knows there's such a halacha of the suspending of the punishment. However, another famous opinion that disputes this, and Rabbi Shloimy says, "Kol malamed bita Torah, whoever teaches his daughter Torah, ki'ilu or not ki'ilu, lamda tiflis." The Gemara is going to explain what exactly does that mean, but basically he's teaching her things that are not appropriate for her, and therefore, to the contrary, one should not be teaching his daughter Torah. Now, once we brought in the word tiflis, which is like unsalted, meaning something that's not really so geshmak, but Rabbi Shloimy says, "Reitze isha bekava tiflis." A woman would prefer very little and tiflus, which Gemara is going to explain also what does he mean to say. But it's better than mites kavin uprishas. Better have tiflus and even very little than have 9 kavin, which is you have so much uprishas, but you're separated. And the Gemara is going to explain exactly what, but we're bringing that in because of the word tiflus, that we said that it's as if you teach your daughter, when you teach her Torah, it's kilam the tiflus. So then Rabbi Shua says this teaching. And another teaching, Hu Yomer, Rabbi Shua used to say, Chassid Sheita, a foolish, pious person, V'rasha Aram, and a cunning, wicked person, V'isha Purusha, and also, again, the idea of Prisha is coming in over here, a woman that is ascetic, that is separated, Umakis Purushan. Shekhamar is going to explain that he bangs himself into walls to show how humble he is and how discreet he is, so he knocks into walls. These people had a elam avali elam. They confound the world. They make the world crazy. Now, related to the halacha of our Mishnah, so Amr Yehuda Mishmul, Mishum Meir, regarding the first halacha, we'll see it relates back. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Meir, Kishiyisi lama Torah etzel Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Meir said that when I used to learn Torah by Rabbi Kiva, Yisi matel kankantem l'toich adyoy. Kankantem is a type of ink. He said I used to put this kankantem into the ink, meaning kankantem is a type of a dye. He said I would put it into the ink. But l'omali dava. And Rabbi Kiva didn't tell me anything. Shabasi is the Rabbi Shmuel, and I came to Rabbi Shmuel. Amalei, he said to me, B'ni, ma malachtecha? What's your profession? Maltila, I said to him, Lavla, and I'm a scribe. Amalei, he says, B'ni, my son, have a zar. Be very careful. Because the work that you do is the work of heaven. And Shema, tachzor ois achas, you might miss out one letter. For example, an aleph or a hey. And like Rashi brings an example, Elikim emes. If you miss out chas v'shalom the aleph, it's Elikim mes, which is obviously something that we would never want to say. You might put in an extra letter. For example, Bereishis Baroya Elikim, not bara in the singular. Baroya, you add a vav, it just changes obviously regarding the whole idea of the singularity of God. So in the Mitzvah it comes that you can destroy the whole world. Be very careful if you're a sefer. So Matila, I told him, Dover echad yeshli, I have something, shani matl techad yoy, that I put into the ink, but kankant b'shemai, and it's called kankantem. Gemara is going to explain right now, or very shortly, what type of response is that to what he's saying about not missing letters. But first, the Gemara finished off the conversation. Amalei said to me, "What? Do you think you put kankantem into ink?" But the Torah says that you're going to erase this parsha of the Sotah. It has to be a writing that you could erase. Now, Rabbi Shmuel held that you could erase the parsha of the Sotah from the Sefer Torah itself. You don't have to have Ksiva Lishma that was written for this Sotah. And however, as we'll see shortly, it's only on the parsha of the Sotah itself that it is particular. But the parsha of the Sotah has to be written with that you could erase it, and therefore, and you could even use the Sefer Torah. So, how could you use kankantem? Kankantem makes that it's not going to be erased. You have to make it that it could be erased. Now, the question first the Gemara asks is, Maika Amalei, what did Rabbi Shmuel tell him? Umaika Mahadle, what did Rameh respond to him? Rameh responded, Rabbi Shmuel said, be careful, because if you miss a letter or you have two extra letter, this can be catastrophic. And Rameh responded, I have something that makes that the Rishima stays there and it doesn't get erased. What does kankantem have to do with adding a letter or missing a letter? So the Gemara says, this is what Rameh told him. What Rameh told him was that forget about adding a letter or missing a letter. The Bakyana, that I'm proficient, I'm a well-versed cipher, that of course I'm not going to make a mistake. But I'll go even one step further. Let's say to be concerned for a fly. What happens is the fly is going to sit on the lettering of a dalas and is going to erase it. Is going to make the dalet into a reish. For example, the dalet of echad. Hashem lekeinu Hashem echad. If you're missing that little thing that's sticking out in the back, Hashem acher. So he's another one, or whatever it is. So he says, even that, don't worry. You tell me about missing a letter, forget about missing a letter, but even part of a letter. Don't worry, I have something shani matl techad yoy that I put into the ink, and it's called kankantem, and therefore it's never going to get erased, not even part of it, and therefore that was the response that Rameh was giving to Rabbi Shmuel. Okay, but the problem the Gemara has with this story is, Ini, is that so? But Vatanu learned the Brayso, Rameh says, Kishisi Lamed Torah Eitz Rabbi Shmuel, says, when I learned Torah Rabbi Shmuel, I would put the kankanim into the ink. And this version says that he didn't tell me anything. It's Rabbi Kiva. They came to Rabbi Kiva. I said it's forbidden. So the Gemara has two questions. Kashya shimush ashimush. Because the previous bryce, the one that first we brought, it said that first Rabbi Meir learned by Rabbi Kiva, and then he went to Rabbi Shmuel. Here, we say he was first by Rabbi Shmuel, and then Rabbi Kiva. That's question number one. Question number two is Kasha Asra Asra. Who said it's Asr? Both of them had it that the second Rebbe said it was problematic, but the problem is the first Brisa says the second Rebbe was Rabbi Shmuel, and the second Brisa says the second Rebbe was Rabbi Kiva. So the Gemara says the first question we can answer, it's not a difficulty on who did he go learn by first, because you could say like this, they're both right. First, like the first Brisa says, he first learned by Rabbi Kiva. But since he couldn't understand the primary reasonings of Rabbi Kiva, because Rabbi Kiva could say something that's tamei, he could say that's tar, and he could say something that's tar and say that's tamei, and he could explain why that is that way. I mean, Grei Salamdin, Rabbi Kiva, there would be too falamdivit for him, so he couldn't understand what he was saying. So also coming to Rabbi Shmuel, came from Rabbi Shmuel, and V'gama Gemara, he learned the Mishnayos that are as they are. He learned from his Rebbe, who learned from his Rebbe, and so on. He learned the facts. Once he knew what he knew, then he was coming to Rabbi Kiva, and he wasn't getting confused because he knew which one's tamei, which one's tar, which was asa, which was mutter. He knew what to rely on and which comes from which psukim. He just had to learn the yisoidis and the foundations of that, which Rashi explains that was really what the Talmud was in the days of Tanoim, who they obviously didn't have Gemara, but it was to understand one thing from another thing. When there was something new that was asked in the base of Medrash, where do you learn it from, and to which Mishnah you should compare it to? That was the Lamda Shashir was Rabbi Kiva. So then, okay, he already knew Vas is Vas from Rabbi Shmuel. So it's not a difficulty. You could say the first Brisa was talking about the first stage, and the second Brisa was talking about the second stage. So yeah, he went to Rabbi Kiva, then Rabbi Shmuel like the first Brisa, but at the same time, like the second Brisa was Rabbi Shmuel, and then when he went back to Rabbi Kiva. But Asra Kasha. But the Gemara says, okay, but the difficulty is who made it Asra? Says the Gemara Kasha, it's a difficulty. The Gemara doesn't say Tiyufta, but it's a difficulty. Well, who exactly was it? That was the one that said it's problematic. Now, related to this halacha that we just brought in of this kankantim into the Diyai, because of the Parsha Sotah that's in the Torah, so Tanya learned the Brisa. He says, Oim Rameir. So Rameir said, Lakol, and this is like this halacha, like we said, that we were concerned of putting in kankantim. He says, Lakol matilin kankantim teichad. Yes, for everything you could put kankantim into the ink, which is very good because it's going to prevent the Sefer Torah from being erased. However, as you continue in Beis, chutz mi parsha Sotah bilvad. Meaning, as Rashi explains, even in the Sefer Torah, which whether it be Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Kiva, one of them told them, how can you use kankantim? It has to be able to be erased. So he says, you could write the Sefer Torah with kankantim, which makes it better, but not for the parsha of the Sotah itself. That's one version. But Rabbi Yaakov says the name of Rameir, no, chutz mi parsha Sotah shel mikdash, meaning you could write the whole Sefer Torah with kankantim, but when you're writing the specific Megillah that was used in the base of Mikdash, those Megillas cannot be written with kankantim. Says the Gemara, my benayu. In other words, we know what's the difference between them, but like Rashi says, what is the machlokes? What's the rationale in the case of the Sefer Torah that says the Parsha Sotah, that obviously what they're disagreeing about? Does that have to be written without kankantim? What's the machlokes? Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Limchuk lo min ha-Torah, like we were saying up until this point. Could you go ahead and erase the Parsha Sotah in the Sefer Torah for this Sotah? That's Ikkabenai, that's the difference between them. According to Tanakama, you could, and therefore, obviously, you could not write it with kankantim because it has to be erased. According to Yaakov, you could not, and therefore, that's why you could write it with kankantim. Which says the Gemara, Bahani Tanoi, this machlekes Tanoim in Rameir is Kehana Tanoi, is like the following machlekes Tanoim that they disagree regarding, do you have to write it lishma, which that's what we're saying, a Sefer Torah is obviously not written lishma for this woman. So that would be the machlekes. Can you use the Sefer Torah or not? Which, if you could, then obviously you have to write it that it could be erased. Is this machlekes the time like in the Brisa? The Brisa says that ein megillas kshera lahashkes b'soita acheres. The Tanna Kama says you could not go ahead and use one woman's Megillah. Let's say she refused to drink. You cannot use it for another woman because it has to be lishma. Rabbi Shloimy says no. Megillas kshera lahashkes b'soita acheres. If one woman backs out, you could go ahead and use it for another woman. Oh, so wait a second. That's exactly what it is. If you hold the Megillah as k'sheir l'ashke b'soita acheres, so that's like Rabbi Yehuda says meichel l'menatayra. Doesn't have to be written l'shma. Tanna Kama says in Megillah k'sheir l'ashke b'soita acheres, and Rabbi Yaakov are the same that ein meichel l'menatayra because be'inim k'siv l'shma. To which Amr Papa says no, not necessarily. Dimalahi, maybe it's not the case because ad kan l'kama Tanna Kama hasam. The Tanna Kama of the second Brisa, the Brisa we just brought. Where does he say that you cannot use one woman's Megillah for another woman that you're telling me that you need it to be Lishma? That's only over there because Elikivan the Intik. Because since it was detached from all women, meaning that it was made specifically for this one woman, Lashum Rachel, so Loihadrum Intik or Lashum Leah, then you can't use it anymore for Leah because it was made for this one, not for that one. Aval Teira, maybe regarding the Sefer Torah, the stomach siva is written unspecific, generic. Maybe it wasn't antagonistic, it wasn't the antithesis, it wasn't written for one versus the other, written in general. So now you could use it and use it for specific, whichever one you want to. So that's one rejection. Or I could tell you the other way. Amar Menachem by Yitzchak, which he's also asking to say that not necessarily is this machlekes tanoim the same as the other machlekes tanoim. He's just asking the other way. He agrees to what Rav Papa's question is. He's saying that one is saying you could ask one way, and he's just saying you could ask the other way. And he's saying, Dim Malahi, maybe it's not the same machlekes tanoim. Because Ad Kan Lakam Rabbi Yeshia Hasam, he in the second Brisa says when you write the Megillah for one woman, said you could use it for another woman, which we were saying, oh, you see, you don't have to have a lishma. So he said, okay, if you wrote it for one woman, to write for another one, for sure, from the Sefer Torah, he would hold the same thing. No, not necessarily. I could say it's only over there, Megillah de'echtav l'shum olis ba'olim. Because ultimately, Lamaisa, the Megillah Sotah was written for the purposes of a curse. So, okay, but one woman, fine, you could use for another woman. But Torah wasn't written as a curse, it was written to learn from. So maybe he would agree actually that no, that you cannot even erase from the Sefer Torah. So it wouldn't be necessarily the same machlekes tanoim that if you wrote it for one woman to use it for another woman, if that's the same machlekes, if you could use from the Sefer Torah or not. Now, but the Gemara has the following question. That says that it doesn't have to be lishma. You could use one woman's Megillah for another woman's Megillah. He says, Leslie, doesn't he hold what we learned in the Mishnah Masechet is Gittin? The Mishnah says, if Kasav, if a man writes for his wife a get, to divorce his wife, and he changes his mind that he's not divorcing her, and then he's in the supermarket, and then he meets a guy from his town, a small town, everyone has the same names, same town, and Ba'amalei says to me, hey, Shmi Kishmecha, my name's like your name, and the name of my wife is like the same name as your wife, and we're from the same town. Hey, you're not getting divorced. It's expensive to write a get. I was thinking about this for a while. I could use it, give it to me, and I'll divorce my wife. Says the Mishnah, no. Boy. It's invalid for him to divorce his wife with it because you need, like it says, v'chasav law. Law means tahar, has to be for har's sake, which is lishma. That's what kasav sefer kiris is. So the question is here also, it says, v'asal hakayin. So what's the difference? Why? How could he say, that it's kosher to use one woman's Megillah for another one? Doesn't he agree to that Mishnah Masechet is Gittin? Amri, they said, it's not a difficulty. Why? Because Hasam over there, v'chasav la'am rachmana. The words in the Torah is to write for her. So the kesiva has to be for her sake. Hachanami, here also it says, v'asal lahakayin. Mayasiya is mechika. That refers only to the mechika. That has to be, when you're doing it, it has to be erased for that woman. But kesiva does not need to be lishma, and therefore he says it's going to be valid to use one woman's Megillah for the other woman's Megillah.
What about the Shloimy Sefer Torah? What did it erase the pasuk first? What did it say? It says, "V'asal lahakayin." Mayasiya. Is mechika. That refers only to the mechika. That has to be when you're doing it has to be erased for that woman. But kesiva does not need to be lishma, and therefore he says it's going to be valid to use one woman's Megillah for the other woman's Megillah.
What about the Shloimy Sefer Torah? To erase a Torah? What's
within a said Torah? I mean, what's the Hegi Timsi? You cut the cloth out?
right? Tosfos has other questions regarding, so when did you write it? It has to be written only after the oaths. But it seems like that you'd be able to erase the Torah. Why is it different than Megillah of the, you wonder what we're going to do with the Sefer Torah?
Could it be they were writing a Sefer Torah, were holding Parshas Sotah, they needed a little piece, they took it, they'll rewrite it later.
Tosfos has something similar where he says that he actually writes it after the oaths are there. Yeah, but why would they use the Sefer Torah? Could be that's the old thing they have. Maybe there's no cipher around and they need to use it and they have nothing else. So the Mishnah said, so he said, okay, so before she finishes drinking, so her face becomes discolored, her eyes start bulging, and her body becomes bloated, and they say, get her out of here. Says the Gemara, so Mani, who's the town of our Mishnah that says that once she starts drinking, the water starts doing its job on already? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon, it's Rabbi Shimon, which we learned in Daf Yomi Testament Aleph. Dama, he says the order of it is as follows. He says, Makives minchasa, first they bring her mincha, v'achkach mashka, and then she drinks the waters. Because the kamadul kova minchasa, because if you didn't bring your mincha yet, the water is not going to work. Because like the pasuk says, minchas zikara in maskeres oven. It's the flour offering that recalling of a sin. So only according to Rabbi Shimon it says that you bring the mincha, then you drink. Will the water start working the moment you drink? Because if you hold the other way around, then it's not going to work even if you drink because the mincha wasn't brought yet. The problem is, says the Gemara, Ema Seifa. The Mishnah later on says, Yesh lo schos, if she has merit, so it would suspend for her. Says the Gemara, Ason l'Rabbanan. That sounds like not like Reb Shimon. It sounds like the Rabbanan. Because the Reb Shimon ha'amah, but he says, as we had this on the we have it later Chav Beis, he says, Ein schos toilah b'mayim ha'macham. He says there's no merit that suspend in the bitter waters, as the Mishnah says later in the Chav Beis. So who's the town of the Mishnah? Reisha sounds like Reb Shimon, Seifa sounds not like Reb Shimon. So Rav Chizdi says you're right. It's not Reb Shimon or the Rabbanan. Hamani Rebbe Kivhi. The Dama that he says on Daf Yomi Testament Beis, he says once you sacrifice the kaimitz, the fistful, she cannot back out from drinking. So obviously he holds makaves minchas b'achkach mashka. So that would explain the Reisha. We could infer from his teaching, you can't back out from drinking. Obviously, that after the kamitza, after the hakravas mincha comes the drinking. We don't see any reason why not. We could say, and regarding merit, Reb Shimon we see explicitly says not. Kippur we don't see, so we could say regarding that, it was like Rabbanan, which is the Seifa, and therefore the time of the Mishnah could be Rebbe Kiva. Then the Mishnah said, they would say, get her out of here because we don't want her to be Matamed Azara. Says the Gemara, wait a second, my time, why are we getting this woman quickly out of here? The Dilma Mesa, because she might die. That's her dastardly death that she has. Says the Gemara, is that to say that a dead person is forbidden to be in the Machna Leviyah, meaning on the Harabayis? Because Ezra's Nashim, and even Shar Nikoner, was not sanctified in the Kedushas Azara. So which makes it just like the rest of the Harabayis, of the Temple Mount. So she's going to die, but Vatanya learned the Brisa, Tamei Meis, someone who became tummy from a dead person, is allowed to go into Machna Leviyah, and not only did we say regarding someone who's tummy from a dead person, which Tosfos explains it doesn't really mean a dead person. Of course a dead person, but we mean even a guy who's holding a dead person. But even a dead person, Shlomo says in the pasuk, Vayikach Moshe atzmas Yosef imay. Moshe Rabbeinu took the bones of Yosef with him. What does it mean with him? It means imay b'mechatzasi, with him in his partitions of where he lived, which in the midbar there were also 3 machnas. Within the curtains of the Oil Moed was the machnas Shechina. The Levium were around the Mishkan Edis, like it says in the beginning of Sefer B'Midbar, that was Machna Leviyah. And you had the Golem, which were 3 parsais, that was Machna Yisrael. Now Moshe was a Levi, and we're saying with him. So you had the bones, you had a dead person with Moshe Rabbeinu and Machna Leviyah. So the equivalent in the Yerushalayim was Harabai, was Machna Leviyah. Machna Shechina was within the Ezras Yisrael, not the Ezras Nashim, which is where she was. So we should need a die. A lot of a dead person there. So Mabai says, you're right. Our concern wasn't that she's going to die. Was Shema Tifres Nida, that she might begin menstruating and become a Nida because of the fright of the bitter waters. Now, a nida, a zav, a zava, or balkeri, they're forbidden to be a machan laviyah, like the Gemara learns of Pesachim, the Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. So our concern was that she's going to become a nida. That's what get her out of here, but not because of her death. Says Gemara, "Lememra to be susa merafia." Is that really to say that fright actually caused her to loosen and her uterus opens and out comes the blood? Says Gemara, yes, that's her concern. Because the Chsiv says a pasuk in Megillas Esther, "V'taschalchel hamalka ma'od." The queen got very afraid. She started shaking and loosening. But Marav says shepirsa nida, that she began menstruating, and therefore you see the fright of what was happening could open up and loosen up the uterus. Says Gemara, but va'anant nan. We learn the Mishnah Masechet Nida that actually says charod misalekes dam, that fright actually removes the blood. So even if you would expect her to become a nida, it actually contracts, constricts, and actually does not make her into a nida. So which one does it? Does fear loosen or does it constrict? Says the Gemara, it depends what type of fear. Pachada, meaning regarding a worry that doesn't come suddenly. Rather, let's say a woman who's worried that maybe the enemy is going to come and kill her. So that's tsumis. That actually constricts and contracts the uterus from expelling the blood. Even at a time of her vest, when generally she has a period, she's not going to have a period. Now, the Gemara in Masechtas Nida was talking about worry, because that's what the Mishnah was talking about over there, meaning anxiety. It says, Higia Shas Vesta, a woman that her expected period, she always gets at a certain time. And she didn't check. The halacha is she's tamei. Why? What's a famous klal in halacha? What's called Eirich Bismanei Ba. The guest comes in his regular time. He always comes at the same time. That's the reference to the Dam Nida. Meir says if she was in the cave, she was hiding out, and it was time for her vest, and she didn't check, she's going to be tahar. If she subsequently checks and she finds that there's no dam. And we don't say Erch Bezmani Ba. Why? Because the charada, the trembling that she has, that she's hiding from the enemy, is misalekes es adam. The anxiety removes the blood. But b'yisusa, that a sudden fright that comes suddenly, for example, like over here, she wasn't afraid up until now, she wasn't trembling, but suddenly she starts realizing her body's starting to suddenly change, and now she's, oh my gosh, what's happening? And so by Esther, where she had the report suddenly out of nowhere that Mordechai was with a sackcloth, what's going on? That is merafia. That actually softens the blood, and that actually opens up the uterus, and then actually is going to make her into a need. So it depends what type of anxiety it is, if it's a terror, if it's a sudden fear, versus a long protracted worry, it's going to do different things to the body, and therefore what they wanted to get her out was the sudden fear of the mind that may cause her to become a nida, and the nida is prohibited to enter into the machan laviyah. Then the Mishnah said, Im yesh lo schus, if she has a merit, then haisa v'chulu, so then it would delay, sometimes a year, sometimes 2 years, sometimes 3 years. Says the Gemara, Mani Masnin, who's the Tana of the Mishnah that says that you can have a schus that can be toila up till 3 years? Says the Gemara, Lo Abba Yosef ben Yechanan, it's not Abba Yosef ben Yechanan, V'lo Rebbe Elazar ben Tzadik ish kvar darim, and V'lo Bishmal. We have 3 opinions, and none of them say it will suspend up to 3 years. The Tana like learn the Brisa. Im yesh lo schus, says the Brisa, if a woman has merit, so the first opinion says toila shloish chadashim. It will suspend for a period of 3 months. Why 3 months? It's the amount of time it takes to recognize that a woman is pregnant, because he darshans the pasuk of veniksa, that she'll be clean through the schus, the amount of time of a nizra zera, which is the amount of time it takes for the semen, for the seed of the of the fetus to be recognizable in the pregnant woman, which is the time of 3 months. That's the Rabbi Yosef ben Chana. Rabbi Elazar ben Yitzchak ish kvar darim. He says no tes chadashim. It could suspend up until 9 months. Why? Because it says in the pasuk v'niksa that she'll be clean, meaning she'll have this zchus v'nizra zera, and she'll have children. Meaning the simple understanding is that if she's clean and she did not sin, she'll have children. But they're reading it as that she'll be clean because of a zchus v'nizra zera, which means to say, and the amount of time it takes to have a child, which like it says the pasuk in Tilim, zera yavdenu yisupar, the seed that serves will say, meaning zera haroy l'saper, a seed that's fit to tell, meaning that she will live and come to say the amount of the shvach of their Rebbeinu Shloim, meaning that's what the pasuk there is talking about. All he's trying to say is that the word zera will mean the full pregnancy of 9 months. That's what you see in the pasuk over there, because it's which zera could say over, only if it's born. And that's therefore when you're going to say v'nizra zera would mean a period of 9 months. And Rabbi Shloimy says shnei masach chaydish. It could even be that it'll suspend for a period of 12 months. And he says v'av pishin rai, even though there's not a full-fledged proof l'davar for this thing that a schus can be toilet 12 months, but zeicher l'davar. But there is some type of allusion to it, which more later they're going to explain why isn't it a full-fledged proof. But the Chassidus says a pasuk in Daniel. Daniel was telling Nebuchadnezzar when he was interpreting his dream that he's going to be chased out from humanity. He's going to live with the animals and the wild animals. He told them, Lohein Malka. However, the king, Milki Yishpat Aloich. Let my counsel find favor in your eyes to believe my counsel I'm giving you. V'chatayach, and your sin, B'tzedakah Breik. You should redeem your sin with charity. V'aviyasach, and your sin, B'michen Anoyin, with having compassion on the poor, as we continue up of Chafal from an Alf, hein to have a arko lishlei vasach. That will give you an extended period of time of peace, that your punishment will not come on you. And that's actually what Nebuchadnezzar did. He gathered every single day the paupers of the Jewish people that were in exile, who needed food, and he provided for them. And that actually was Daniel's intention when he gave him this idea, was that he saw the Jewish people in exile that were going knocking on door to door. So therefore he told him this idea. Now, Ksivit says after that, al Nebuchadnezzar malka. All the punishment came to Nebuchadnezzar. Ksivit, it says after that, that a few months, a meaning of after 12 months. So we see that the schus, the merit, suspended for him a period of 12 months. So therefore, that's the zeichel adav that you see a schus can be tried for 12 months. I mean, the schus of giving tzedakah to the Yidden suspended his punishment of 12 months. But we see there's maybe 3 months, maybe 9 months, maybe 12 months, but no one says 3 years. So who is our Mishnah like when it says there's going to be 3 years? So it says the Gemara, La'olam, the truth is our Mishnah that says 3 years is Rabbi Shmuel. Now Rabbi Shmuel was the one who said 12 months. So where do you see 3 years? Oh, because v'ashkach kra the amar v'tani. Because we found a pasuk that extends this period of time. In other words, the Torah writes that Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to extend it up until 3 times. So therefore, since each time, like we see by Nebuchadnezzar, will be 12 months, you take 12 times 3, you'll get 3 years. Where do you see that? It says a pasuk in Amos. It says, Koyamar Hashem, Ashloisha Pesha Edom, for the 3 sins of Edom. So since we see somewhere that Hashem is going to suspend something for 3 sins, and each suspension is 12 months, so 12 months times 3 will give you a period of 3 years. That's why he says it could be the woman's chus will be Taila up until 3 years. Now, says the Gemara, my afapish and Rayla Dava Zecher. But why did Rabbi Shmuel say it's not a full-fledged proof, it's only a Zecher? What do you mean? You see that a schus can be Taila for 12 months, and then you see Hashem will look away for Pisha Edom 3 times, that's 12 times 3. No. Because Demashani of the Kechavim, maybe idol worshippers are different, that from heaven they're not quick to punish them for their sins in this world, and therefore Hashem will suspend it up until 12 months. But from the Klal Yisrael, from a Yid, Hashem is quick to punish in this world, so that they get rewarded in the next world, and maybe they're more medactic after them. Maybe you would say that this woman, this suspected Sotah, would not be suspended for 12 months, meaning times 3, which is 3 years, and therefore we're saying that it's Zeichel. The Brisa said only 12 months, but you said it's not a full-fledged proof because maybe a Yid is different than a guy. Maybe a guy will extend longer than a Yid, therefore it says it's not a relative, it's a Zeichel, but that was the source for the halach of our Mishnah, 3 years, because you see Pisha Edom is 3 times 12 is 3 years. Thank you to any time for hosting us.